Hello all, welcome to another Learning video. Today, we are going to discuss IELTS Speaking Part 2, Tips, Tricks, and Strategies. But first, let's quickly have an overview of what is IELTS Speaking Test. The IELTS Speaking Test has three parts, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. Part 1, which lasts for about 4 to 5 minutes, and here you are asked about 8 to 9 questions on familiar topics. Topics like they can ask you something about your hometown, your country, your likes, your dislikes, your hobbies, etc. After Part 1, they move on to Part 2. What is Part 2? In Part 2, you are given a topic with some cues. The examiner gives you 1 minute to prepare or make your notes, and then 1 to 2 minutes to speak on that particular topic, covering all the points that are given on the cue card. After Part 2, the examiner moves to Part 3, which again lasts for about 4 to 5 minutes. And here you are asked, again, at least 6 to 7 questions. Now, these questions are related to the topic in Part 2. Today, we are only going to talk about IELTS Speaking Part 2. What is it actually? In IELTS Speaking Part 2, you give a talk. You should be prepared to speak for 2 minutes. The examiner will ask you to speak for 1 to 2 minutes. Ignore this. Aim to speak for 2 minutes. It's your chance to show the examiner how well you can talk for an extended period. Many people call it the long turn because it is your turn to speak for a long time. 2 minutes doesn't seem like a long time, but if you've never done it before, it can speak like forever. Even for native speakers, so practice speaking for 2 minutes. IELTS Speaking Part 2, what actually happens? In IELTS Speaking Part 2, the examiner will ask you to speak for between 1 and 2 minutes on a topic. The IELTS examiner will give you a topic card. On the card, there will be a short description of a topic with some ideas for what to include. The topic will be related to personal experience. For example, a person you know or an event you participated in, etc. The examiner will give you exactly 1 minute to prepare your talk. The examiner will give you a piece of paper and a pencil to write down some ideas. You could make a list of ideas and keywords or draw a mind map. Make sure that you do not write anything on the cue card. After 1 minute, the examiner will ask you to start your talk. You give your talk. You are expected to speak without interruption from the examiner for up to 2 minutes. The examiner will listen and say nothing, but she or he might nod and gesture in order to encourage you to continue talking. So please continue talking. Before we move ahead and show you the question that you can have in your Part 2, let's look at what is the examiner actually looking for. In IELTS Speaking Part 2, the IELTS examiner will assess your speaking test against the IELTS assessment criteria. There are 4 areas: fluency and coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, and pronunciation. To get a band score of 8, this is what you must achieve in these 4 areas. Let's understand fluency and coherence. You should speak fluently. Occasional hesitation for language or ideas is acceptable. Your talk should be coherent and well structured. Your talk should also be relevant to the given topic. Next is the lexical resource. You should use a wide range of language appropriately with some idiomatic language. Some mistakes again are accepted. Your vocabulary needs to show that you can talk about a variety of different topics. This is what is meant by flexible use of language. Next is the grammar. You should be using a wide range of grammatical structures with only very rare errors. And the last is the pronunciation. Your pronunciation should be easy to understand throughout, and you should use a variety of pronunciation features such as intonation, connected speech, word and sentence stress, and a steady pace of speech, not too slow and not too fast. Speaking too fast will hold your band score down. Now, let's move ahead and understand some typical IELTS Speaking Part 2 topics. IELTS Speaking Part 2 topics are related to personal experiences and life events. Typical topics include school, study, work, important events or changes in your life, places you have been to or want to visit in the future, hobbies and free time activities, or your goals and ambitions. Let's look at a sample part 2 question, which says, describe a time of the day you like. You should say what time of day it is, what you do at that time, who you are usually with, and explain why you like it. Before we start answering this question, or before we look at how we answer this question, let's look at a few tips and strategies that you can apply when going for your speaking part 2. The first is make notes before you talk. Before the examiner asks you to start talking, he or she will give you 1 minute to make some notes. Make your notes properly. Next is memorize a good opener. It is very, very important to memorize a good opener to start your talk. For example, if your topic is describe a beautiful place to visit in your country, you could say, I'd like to talk about a beautiful place in my country. Or you can say, well, there are many beautiful places in my country which I would like to talk about, but I suppose the most beautiful place I have been to is so and so. A good opener will impress the examiner, but the next step we're going to talk about will impress the examiner even more. Paraphrase the topic. Now, what is paraphrasing? When referring to the topic, don't use the words from the topic card. Instead, use your own words. This is called paraphrasing. So, for example, if the topic is describe a beautiful place to visit in your country, don't say, I'm going to describe a beautiful place to visit in India. Instead, say, for example, I'm going to talk about a stunning destination which people can travel to in the north or in the east of India. The next tip, keep talking. Try to keep talking and talking and talking. Don't worry about the time. The examiner will stop you after 2 minutes. Don't speak too quickly. Try to speak at a steady, natural pace. Do not speak too quickly. This will hold down your band score for pronunciation. Also, don't speak too slowly. This will hold down your band score for fluency and coherence. The next tip is decide what to talk about quickly. Lie if need be. Remember, this is not your exam of truth. They are checking you on your language. Sometimes it's difficult to think of something to talk about. Let's say if you have to talk about your favorite teacher. So remember, you have a minute to prepare your talk. So make your notes wisely. And the last tip, and the most important one, is ask for clarification. If you do not understand a word on the topic card or your task, you can ask the examiner to explain. But don't just say, I don't understand. Instead, use some more advanced phrases. For example, you could say, by that, do you mean this? Or, if I understand correctly, it means that. Or you can also say, so is it okay if I talk about? if you ask for clarification using good language, you will really impress the examiner. Now, let's look at this sample question and answer the IELTS speaking part 2. It says, describe a major decision you've taken in your life. You should say what the decision was, what other choices were available to you, why you made this decision you did, and explain if you think the decision was a good one. The examiner, after giving you the cue card, will obviously give you 1 minute preparation time. And after 1 minute, you're going to talk on this topic. Now, let's see how you're going to answer this. One major decision that I've taken in my life was to study law at university. This meant moving to a new town where the university was located and spending 3 years studying a subject that was completely new to me. There were several other choices that I could have taken at that time. For a while, I found it hard to make up my mind. I considered taking a degree in English, as this was always my favorite subject at school, and I always got A grades in English exams. Another option open to me was to apply for a degree course in French. At one point, I even considered trying to get into university to study physics, as this was another subject I loved. Eventually, the decision I reached was to take a law degree. The reason being that I thought this would open more doors to me in the future. I had no wish to be a lawyer, but I thought that the breadth of knowledge I would gain would set me in good stead as a journalist, which is what I wanted to be at the time. I was also interested in understanding more about how our legal system works. As to whether or not this was a good decision, I think it was definitely the right choice for me. I found studying law fascinating and then went on to work as a journalist and researcher for some years. I also had a sideline in teaching legal English to lawyers and eventually found that I much preferred teaching English to journalism. Gradually, I took on more teaching work until I eventually dropped the journalism altogether. So that original decision to study law caused a chain of events that took me to where I am now. And I think it is one of the best decisions that I've taken so far. That's it. That is almost 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, the examiner will stop you. And that's it for today's video.